Welcome to Doing the Work, frontline stories of social change, where we bring you stories of real people working to address real issues. I am your host, Shimon Cohen. Thank you to FIU's Disability Resource Center for providing transcription services. In this episode, I talk with Lutze Segu, who is the Social Justice Doula from Miami, Florida. Lutze explains that she works to, quote, create the conditions for social justice learning and transformation to take place for individuals and organizations. She talks about how she loves seeing people grow and become committed to anti-racist social justice work, become politically active, how she deeply believes in the inherent value and good of people to change, and that even though conditions in the world can be terrible, she always has hope doing this work. Lutze shares techniques she uses with people to help with this transformation and explains how theory, specifically Black feminism, saved her life, helping her see how systems oppress and that people are not to blame for their conditions, and how this relates to social work's person and environment approach. We discuss the white supremacy enacted by social workers and clinicians who pathologize oppression, placing the problem inside clients, rather than acknowledging the violence of this, quote, anti-Black, anti-woman, anti-queer, anti-trans, anti-immigrant world, and how social workers should be committed to social justice, not gatekeeping and the maintenance of oppression. She challenges us to ask ourselves what we are really practicing and, quote, how are we personally going to divest from anti-Blackness? Lutze also talks about how she got into this work, sharing a powerful story of what it meant to attend Florida Memorial University and HBCU in Miami. I hope this conversation inspires you to action. Hey, Lutze, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. And, just so listeners have a sense of what's happening in the world, in the U.S. right now while we're recording this, since this will be the July episode, but we're recording in June. Right now, there's protests that are happening all over the country for Black Lives Matter in response to another horrific killing of a Black person, George Floyd, by police. So I just want to kind of ground our conversation in that current context and then open it up to you, whatever you want to share to start, and also, to let listeners know what you do.
Thank you for the context. So where I want to start is I really, here we are again. Anti-Black violence is just permeating the streets, permeating our consciousness. And we've never been here before in the sense of we're doing this in the middle of a global pandemic. So we don't know what the long-term repercussions of that is going to be, especially we already know that the racist disparities and how COVID-19 is impacting Black people and Black bodies. So we don't even know how people showing up in mass, what's that going to do 2-3 weeks from now? And also we've never done these kinds of actions under the current president that we have. And so these conditions are really tricky. It's tricky, it's weird, it's the same thing, but it's not really the same thing because there's a lot of context that's radically different and has shifted. Well, I am Lutze. I am the Social Justice Doula. And what does that mean? That means that I create the conditions for social justice learning and transformation to take place. If you know anything about the birth world, you know that midwives catch the babies. And the doula, though, I like to think of the doula as a person who curates the vibe so that birth can happen, so that transformation can happen. And so I do that work. I accompany individuals, I work with organizations, and I help in creating the container, holding space, creating the vibe so that folks can operationalize their social justice values.
That's cool. And I love how you explain the doula process, that creating the vibe to lead to the birth. How long have you been doing that work?
Well, officially under the Social Justice Doula title, maybe I'm going into year 2. But for a minute, I've been on the side kind of hustling and doing my own consultancy for a good little minute. I'm a social worker, so I did a lot of frontline social work. And what I realized, and my expertise was working with youth, specifically LGBTQ youth experiencing homelessness. And so what I found is that in working with youth, I had to do a lot of education of the adults, because the adults were mainly their bullies, whether it be their parents, whether it be their schooling, adults, just really trampling on the rights and the agency and the sovereignty of young people. And so I had to do a lot of coaching, a lot of advocating, a lot of education. And I realized that I really kind of stumbled upon the fact that teaching and facilitating is my superpower, and that I was really good at it. And I was good at it with adults, and I was good at it with young people. And I realized this is something I want to do. I want to democratize information. I want to whatever I learned, spread it out and give people the tools to do the things that they need to do so they could practice the things that they need to practice. So I'm really bad with time. So officially being an official around doing this LLC thing, I would say about 2 years. But I've been doing this form of a thing for the past 3 or 4 years, maybe a little more, in some way, shape, or form.
So what do you love about the work that you do?
I love the fact that I get to do work that is 100% rooted in my values. And I know that as a person living in the United States of America, that is that's a privilege, that is an honor. Because most people, where they draw their paycheck, how they draw their paycheck, is not always in line with their politics if they have a socio-political lens. So I love that. And I also love the fact that I get to accompany people. I get to watch people in their process of waking up and getting politicized. There's something really beautiful and powerful when a human being taps into the knowledge that they are not the problem, the system is the problem. And when they make that shift, that political shift, and they start to make different political calculations, and they start to see themselves as a political being, and they want to shape that political being, that is powerful. And so because I'm a social worker, I do believe that people are inherently valuable, and people can change and be transformed if they want to. So to see people who were apolitical, to see people who were timid, to see people who weren't about that anti-racist social justice life, like be about that anti-racist justice life, it's just okay, that to me is just beautiful. It's inspiring, seeing what the human spirit can do and become when it truly knows itself and is starting to ask itself hard questions, and starting to no longer accepting the version of themselves that white supremacy has given them. That's a very beautiful, very powerful, very inspiring thing to watch, which is why even when the conditions of the world are awful and horrible, because of the work that I do, I never fall into despair, because I know where change and hope lies, and my hope is in the right places, and I see change all around me, and I'm grounded in what I need to be grounded in. And so that work feeds me, it keeps me going, even in times such as these. And I just know for most people, especially in the middle of a global pandemic, they can't say that about their work. So I'm grateful that as a Black person, as a Black woman living in the United States of America, that I do work that I like, that I love, that I'm proud of, that I low-key would do for free, have done for free at various points. I know in this capitalist society, that's big.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's really incredible. And the hope that you convey is powerful. As you were talking, I was thinking about the part where you said when you see this shift in people, where they recognize that they're not the problem, the system's the problem. And I was wondering if there's certain techniques that you found helpful in helping people to have that shift. And I'm I'm figuring that that's going to be different depending, obviously, who the person is, because there's different blocks to that for different people based on their identity.
Yeah. So, well, I'm a third year doctoral student, so I'm like super hella nerdy. And so I always say that theory saved my life. So finding Black feminist thought, every time I read feminist texts, I'm reminded like, oh, okay, I'm not tripping. It's not me. There's a name for
Right.
this. It's patriarchy, it's misogyny, it's whatever. And so I try to do the same thing with people, like in regards to like introducing them to different texts, different those kind of things. But what I do, this is straight out of my social work training, is just like I listen really well, like for what people, because if you're, when we're doing assessments, those kind of things, like, people are telling you what's important to them. People are telling you what their struggles are. And when you can really listen to people's story, and I like to use, just using different parts of narrative therapy, where it's just like helping people to reshape their story and to be like, is it you? Is it you? Or is it patriarchy? Is it you? Or is it white supremacy? Is it you? Or is it classism? And so just helping people to make that distinction between them and their conditions. And so that way, folks are not so stuck in their shame around stuff that they don't need to be shameful about, because they didn't go to Walmart and buy these conditions. These conditions were given to them. And so, so for me, I'd say like introducing people to different socio-political ideologies and readings, and just really listening to them, and just like using their own language, their own way of seeing the world, and just kind of helping them like shift it or stand differently and look at things differently. And so they can start to see and put two and two together. Because eventually, you listen to people long enough, they'll kind of tell you and show you what is it they're looking for. And I just try to be really open and clued into that. And so really helping people to see that, and so that they can see, like, because, we don't empower anyone, right? We just create the conditions for people to put two and two together. And when people put two and two together for themselves, they're like, oh, okay, I get it. I'm getting it. I see it. And they go off and they do the same thing for someone else. And I just think people, as long as people feel seen and heard and affirmed, they're open to receiving quite a few things. And that's something, well, people who recruit for neo-Nazis, they know that well. You listen to people, you find out what they want and what they need. You could flip that for them in various ways. Some people are using that power to flip for good, and some people are not. So that's essentially what I do. It's just no magic per se. It's just that I don't think people are used to being listened to in a very deep way anymore. And so when you can do that, and you can like show people like how, hey, it's not you. And I think a lot of people are looking for an alternative to I'm the problem. Like, we've been fed that steady diet. And I think deep down in people's knowing, in their bodies and on a cellular level, I think they want to be wrong about that. And I'm happy to help people be like, yeah, you are wrong about that. It ain't you.
Mm-hmm. As you're talking about that, it really gets me thinking about social work training, especially clinical training. And those types of conversations are often not happening in a therapy session, right? It's very much centered on problems within the person, some diagnostic criteria that's been met, and a prescribed intervention that is evidence-based. So I was just as you were speaking, it just got me thinking about that.
Which is unfortunate, because the difference between us and everyone else should be person and environment. So even if you are a licensed clinical social worker, you should never be making someone feel as if it's them. And also the level of hubris and ego, you really think your 30, 40-minute talk therapy is just going to undo what this person's getting ready to go back into? Like, that's just absurd. And so if we are social workers and we are distinct and we are different from other people who do mental health, we need to stick to the thing that makes us different And last time I checked, that was person and environment. And so like, yeah, no, like, it's pure white supremacist rubbish to in this anti-Black world, anti-woman world, anti-queer world, anti-trans world, anti-immigrant world to tell people it's them. That's just that's a level of psychic violence that I just don't see how people can sign up to do that. Like that's just and I get it, once people get out of social work school, they just want to hang their shingles, they just want to bill and they just want to do their thing and they get disconnected. Which is why our profession looks the way that it looks, which is why our clients are no better off in a lot of ways because we have become agents of the state, agents of white supremacy, and we're playing games out here when we need to, when we spent all this money to get all this fancy education just to rebuke it in various ways. Like we can argue, like, we could argue about the education that we got and what was relevant, what was not. But for the most part, we all got a very solid, like social workers are responsible for knowing a lot. Mm-hmm. Like when you compare a master's in social work to other master's degree, like I remember reading an article a while back that said, a MSW is a 21st century JD degree. Like you got to know everything. You got to know psychopathology, how to work with individuals, how to work with families, how to work in groups, organizations. Like that's a lot of knowledge to be responsible for. And so if you took the time to get this pretty robust and in-depth degree, why would you go into the field just to rebuke all that you just learned? Granted, on some level, some of the stuff we learn, we do need to let go because it's rooted in white supremacy. But like, what are we, but we're going to turn ourselves into mini psychologists and mini like whatever. Why? No. So yes, person and environment. And we have to ask ourselves, what are the conditions? What are the things that are making people react the way that they're reacting? And are their reactions, the reactions are appropriate considering the horrific environments that they are in. Like it might look inappropriate to people outside, but if you have a trauma-informed lens, the way the people who we work with and for respond to these dehumanizing conditions is actually rather appropriate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to read you one of your own quotes. So this is off your website. I became a social worker to work myself out of a job. I knew that as long as the world needs social workers, it means we have not achieved social justice, and social justice is the goal. That's a powerful quote. That's a powerful statement right there. And I was hoping you could say some more about that.
Yeah, like legit. I think all of us who call ourselves social workers have to ask ourselves a really hard question. Are we in this to work ourselves out of a job, or are we in this to oversee and gatekeep and maintain oppression and subjugation? So when I became a social worker, real talk, I always, like, again, I don't believe I'm empowering anybody or anything. I always saw it like it was an honor to accompany people and to show them, hey, those things that you're doing to adapt and cope and whatever, over here, we call it resiliency. You call it getting by. You call it hustling. You call it doing what you got to do. Let me show you how. Let me show you what you're already doing well and kind of buffer you and give you some more skills and more resources to really help you do what you're doing well. And so for me, as long as we live in a world where we need social workers, that's a problem. Then that means people are remaining vulnerable. Like social workers don't work with upper middle class, rich people. Like we work with a very specific class of folks. And if that class of folks keeps growing in numbers, leaps and bounds, their vulnerabilities keeps growing, and we need, and social work school can't keep up they can't, they have to add so many seats every year. Like, that's a problem to me. That's a problem to me. I'm happy that our profession exists, and it's not okay the conditions in which that creates our profession. I'm happy that I do what I do, and I'm not okay with the injustices that makes my job like forever available. Like, I was talking to someone the other day, and I had to remind him, like, you're a social worker. You are never going to be unemployed.
Mm-hmm.
And like, that's a good thing. And let's really look at that. Like, all the things that are creating the need and the want for social workers. And so for me, I'm about liberation. Obviously, I'm not foolish enough to think that social work as a profession, nonprofit as a system, as a complex is going to save anything, because like, nonprofits have been around for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And we can argue what needles they've pushed, what they've made better. I'm for liberation. I want people to be liberated. I want individuals and communities to be liberated. I want justice. And our profession does a lot of things. However, it's not always at the forefront of justice.
Right. Yeah, like a lot of the way things are worded in our profession, and a lot of statements I've seen coming out from all sorts of different places, because everyone's putting out a statement, and it's like this disconnect that there's always going to be people who are vulnerable. Like, it's already like that's been accepted, right? And like inside the literature, inside our code of ethics, it's like, we do this because we've got to protect these vulnerable people, rather than let's change the conditions where people end up vulnerable to begin with. Not saying there'll never be people who are vulnerable in different ways, but there are people who are vulnerable straight up because of systemic oppression, and that's the reason they're vulnerable, and that's it, and we need to get rid of it. And I was hoping you could speak a little bit to that, because you and I were talking earlier before we started recording a little bit about the code of ethics as well.
So I always say the most insidious act of violence that white supremacy plays on us is it robs us of our imagination. And because it robs us of our imagination, it tells us that the world we have is the world we must accept. We can make some cosmetic changes here and there. We can reform this here and there. But like liberation, transformation, that's too big. That's too lofty. And we say this as people who have smartphones, who can run companies and small countries from our iPhones and our Androids. So it's very interesting, that paradox. And so for me, what happens is anti-racism is a practice of imagining and reimagining and practicing a new ways of being and moving towards a new world. And so for me, I make it a part of my resistance, part of my social justice politic is to always activate my imagination and ask myself, what can be different? How can this be different? How can this be transformed? Because again, I'm Haitian American. I'm proud descendant of people who drove their colonizers out of their country. Someone had to like that. If you listen, if you really understand the story of the Haitian Revolution, that's something out of a Marvel comic book, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense, but it's a thing that happened. And so, and if you know the history of slavery in the United States of America, like slave owners didn't retire. They were driven out of business. That too, in that day, was considered radical and like that can never happen. That was outside of the scope of the imagination. Like, the Union was about to fall apart over slavery. So I say all this to say we have lots of evidence of things that at the time were beyond our imagination and happened, and we're still living with the after effects of them happening. And so I don't accept that the way this world is how it has to be. We are in an imagination fight. And right now, the white supremacist imagination, it's been winning for a long time. But if you look around and if you're paying attention, you're seeing like, that's not going to be for too much longer, which is why the streets are crying out the way that they are, because this imagination fight, because people are like, actually, I have a different imagination. I want a plurality. I want something different. I want a world where we don't enforce gender in a very specific kind of way. I want a world in which income inequality doesn't have to be. I want a world in which, we just do things different. We know ourselves differently. And I, for one, am very happy and excited about that, because there's a lot of us who have not accepted and will not accept until we take our last breath, that we have to accept the world that is currently. That's no, absolutely not. Nah.
I like that about the imagination. I like that a lot. As you started talking a little bit about your background, I wanted to ask you, on a bigger level, like, how did you get into all of this work? Like, how did you choose social work to even begin with?
Wow. So that's a really interesting story. So when I first graduated high school and went off to school, I went off to this all women's college in Wesleyan, named Wesleyan in Macon, Georgia. And I wasn't feeling it, and I dropped out. And then I came back home, and I went to Miami-Dade off and on, and then finally, I finished at Florida Memorial University, which is a historical Black college in Miami. And that was a game changer for me. So I grew up watching A Different World. I grew up watching the Cosbys, those kind of things. And I always was like, I wanted a Black college experience. I didn't even know that Florida Memorial existed. And when I found out, I was like, oh my God, there's an HBCU right in my backyard. I gotta go. Mm-hmm. So I went, and I majored in English literature, and that changed my life. So being in an academic institution where no one treated you as if, like, my intelligence was never questioned at Florida Memorial University. Mm-hmm. Like, the dean is Black, the groundskeepers is Black, the people who fried the chicken on Tuesday is Black. Like, this is all Black everything. And so that, I needed that. I was just like, okay, that was awesome. That was dope. And then I graduated. When I graduated, the recession had just started. And the kinds of jobs that I were applying for were very social worker-esque, but I didn't know that. So I'm just, I got my English lit degree, and people were like, girl, you got an English literature degree. Why are you applying for these jobs? And there are no jobs because there's a recession. Mm-hmm. And so at that time, I'm coming into my consciousness, and I've gone to this HBCU. I've read the autobiography of Assata Shakur. I'm like, I've come into my consciousness around Black feminism, and I'm just reading any and everything that I could come in contact with. This is around the time Twitter is starting. This is around the time there's Tumblr, and there's a lot of political education that's happening online. And I am just eating it up for breakfast, lunch, and dinner and snack. And I meet this woman online, and we become friends on Twitter, and then we become Facebook friends. And then we start talking on the phone, and she's a social worker, and she lives in Houston. And I was just having a major crisis. Like, I had just applied for the 100th job, no response, no nothing. And she asked me, she was like, what do you want to do? And I explained to her what I want to do. And she was like, oh, you want to be a social worker. I was like, social worker? I was like, girl, I don't know what you're talking about. Because for me, the impressions, the people who I thought were social workers, is like, for those of us who's ever been to a government office, if you've ever needed unemployment or in things of that nature, I was under the assumption, like most lay people, that all of those people in those offices are social workers. And there was a way in which these people had a lot of disdain for people seeking help. Yeah. They weren't very nice. And I was just like, nah, I'm not that kind of person. She was just like, no. And she explained to me social work, those kind of things. And I did my research. And I was just like, yeah, actually, this is exactly what I want to do. And then I started looking at the different schools in South Florida. And then I was like, you know what? I really like Berry University. I live not too far. And I was just like, let's see. And honestly, so next to attending So one of the best decisions I ever made, of course, was attending a historical Black college. And the second would be becoming a social worker, pursuing that degree. And I'm just really grateful that I had the kind of professors that I did. They nurtured me. I was able to ask hard questions. This analysis that I have, this way of seeing the world, this strength-based perspective, person and environment, it fits so well with my Black feminist socio-political ideologies. It fits so well with my social justice, all that kind of stuff. And so I just rooted myself into that. And that is how I came to social work. And I have to say, I never thought I would get to do all the things that I have been able to do with that MSW degree. The one major critique I have of social work school is that they don't do a good job of showing us and teaching us all the things we can do as social workers and all the spaces and places that need social workers, but they're unconventional. And so once I started realizing like, oh, every room needs a social worker. And then I started like flipping that and kind of making my presence known in places and spaces where you wouldn't expect social workers to be. That's when I was able to really tap in. I feel as if I am more of an asset to social work now that I don't do traditional social work jobs. Because, once a social worker, always a social worker. So yeah, that's how I got there.
Yeah, absolutely. We carry it with us everywhere we go.
For better or for worse.
So I wanted to ask you, since we're getting towards the end of, just if there's anything else you wanted to use this space and this platform to talk about.
Well, I want to urge, all your listeners, I know is for people who are really serious about social change. I don't know what the context will be by the time this episode comes out, but I know what the context is right now. Mm-hmm. And now is a time for us to really ask ourselves some hard questions and ask ourselves, what are we practicing? Because sometimes I think there's a disconnect between what we say we believe and what we're actually practicing. And so I want to invite people to deepen their practice around their social justice skills, around social change, because social change requires personal transformation. We have to change how we see ourselves, how we parent, how we relate to each other romantically, personally, where we give our money to. Like, we have to be personally transformed if we are going to win the ideological fight outside of us. So if I am unwilling to do my own personal work, if I am unwilling to make the changes that I need to make, how is that possible that I'm going to really call on my courage in the public space within the Republic to bring about social change or to be about social change? So I just want us to be more reflexive and just ask ourselves some really tough questions. Because, we are again in the middle of this anti-Black violence, and we all have to ask ourselves, how are we personally going to divest from anti-Blackness? If Black life is truly to matter, what in your personal life has to change in order for that to be a thing that reigns supreme within the public sphere?
Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for coming on here, and thanks for doing the work in the community.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Doing the Work, Frontline Stories of Social Change. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Please follow on Twitter and leave positive reviews on iTunes. If you're interested in being a guest or know someone who's doing great work, please get in touch. And thank you for doing real work to make this world a better place.